That actually is a great transition to the next topic I wanted to ask you about, and that's Operation Gladio, because Gladio is another example of a very close connection between Western intelligence agencies and organized crime, particularly Sicilian mafia, and what we know of as the P2 Lodge, or the Propaganda Due Lodge in Italy. And this was a post World War II, sort of oddly enough, fascist tending series of lodges that were able to be sources for recruitment, according to the public journalistic material that we have, on the part of the CIA and other outfits to sort of, again, recruit from also organized crime. We have the character Michelle Sindona, and we have the character Licio Gelli. And that ties into secret societies as well as Masonic networks, things like that. Is Gladio a huge component of that post World War II alliance with the Vatican and Vatican Bank structure, or is this exaggerated?
I always believed that that what we've learned publicly. And let me preface this by saying everything I learned about Operation Gladio, I learned after I left the CIA. It was in 1990 that the Italian Prime Minister, and I think it was Andreotti at the time, went public when speaking to Parliament about Operation Gladio. For your viewers who don't know what Gladio is, it was an operation hatched by the CIA, MI6, the Vatican, and NATO to leave essentially sleeper agents behind right at the end of World War II. And in the couple of years after, just in case of a Soviet invasion, so that there would be an intelligence structure in place that could help the Western services confront the Soviets. In retrospect, looking at it in 2026, it seems kind of quaint. The thing of an interesting movie that might, get nominated for an Academy Award or two. But back then it was deadly serious. Deadly serious. We really believed the Soviets were going to invade Western Europe. We really believed it. And so people were scrambling to create an intelligence infrastructure. Keep in mind, too, that the CIA and NATO weren't created until 1947. So there was this period of about a year and a half from 45 to early 47 where we were just winging it. MI6 was sort of the preeminent intelligence service in the Western world, with the KGB being the preeminent service in the Eastern world. And President Truman's advisors were saying, listen, we need to be prepared for a Soviet invasion of Western Europe. And so Truman asked the British to send MI6 officers to New York to sit with Americans and to help us create what he called a central intelligence agency, a place where all foreign intelligence could be collected and analyzed. Just as a kind of a funny aside, all of this ended up happening as part of what's called the National Security Act of 1947. But as an interesting aside, J. Edgar Hoover, the long time director of the FBI, he was the head of the FBI for 48 years. He was strongly opposed to the creation of a CIA. And an NSC, the National Security Council, was also created in that same National Security Act of 1947. So he was going around Capitol Hill asking members of Congress to vote against it. And this is exactly the opposite of what President Truman wanted. Truman got wind that Hoover was working against passage of the bill. And so he called Hoover in and told Hoover, you've got this all wrong. This Central Intelligence Agency, it's going to be a component of the FBI. So you'll be head of the FBI and of the CIA. And he said, oh, and he lifted his objection. It was a lie, of course. There was never any intention for the CIA to be a division of the FBI. And Hoover never forgave Truman for lying to him. But we were scrambling in 1946 and early 1947. Finally, these MI6 officers came to New York. They were met by Bill Donovan and Prescott Bush and a handful of other swells from, Wall Street and the OSS days. And with some, pads of paper, they came up with a centralized intelligence service that we called the CIA.
Yeah, it's a fascinating history. I remember, several texts that discuss the extreme influence, I guess you could say, from British intelligence on how to structure it, how to set it up.
Yeah.
Several early figures were very well trained by the British, like Frank Wisner. He's a
Yeah. He's
massive
a
student.
legend.
Yeah, massive student of British counterintelligence. But in terms of like going back to Gladio real quick, a lot of writers conceive of this as a template, something that is not just about, setting up networks within Europe that would stave off a Soviet NKVD style takeover, but also perhaps train terror cells that could be activated later on. Now we know that perhaps Gladio probably ended, but maybe other types of operations or templates that some authors, I think Doug Valentine and others connect.
Yeah.
They connect these types of operations to the template of Iran-Contra, training, the right-wing death squads there, and also ISIS Al-Qaeda type training that you would get, under Brzezinski and Carter and Gates in the late 70s, early 80s for the Soviet situation. Do you think that's accurate? Is that exaggerated? Is it a template that's used? One last point. I remember reading Miles Copeland's book, Game of Nations, and he was discussing that in his time in Egypt and in Syria, when he was a consultant to the governments there, obviously he says, I was working for the CIA. He says, we would use terrorists all the time. He says they're great patsies and dupes. I'm not saying that the CIA runs every terror operation, but he says it's a very useful tool in the toolkit. Is that accurate? Is this exaggerated as well? Is it a template that's kind of a way to structure Iran-Contra, ISIS, Gladio?
Oh yeah. No, it's not exaggerated, and I would actually take issue with his statement that they're dupes. They're not dupes. They're partners. They're compensated handsomely, and you bank a favor that way.
Well, I think he's saying the person who goes in and actually blows himself up is the dupe, but
totally.
But maybe the handlers are not dupes.
No, I'm with you on that. Yes, I misunderstood. That would be the dupe. I mean, even somebody like me, that was not really my world at the CIA. I was strictly a counterterrorism officer, but even I had contact with organized crime overseas, and we didn't give each other the warm and fuzzies, and we didn't invite each other to dinner at each other's homes or introduce each other to our respective wives. But we shook hands and money exchanged hands, and I got what I wanted and he got what he wanted, and then we never saw each other again. So that's actually quite a common event. There's risk, of course, because you're dealing with people who, in some cases are stone cold killers, and you need to trust them to a point where they do what you're paying them to do. The initial encounter is what's the most dangerous, I think. I have told a story. I was dealing with an organized crime figure overseas in the Middle East, and there was a French intelligence officer dealing with him as well. And the French intelligence officer one day was just found dead in a ditch on the side of the road. And so we had to all meet. Like, should I go to the next meeting? Are they going to kill me at the next meeting? I don't know. I said, I don't think he's going to kill me. I think he trusts me. So I go to the next meeting. It was very tense. It turned out to be our last meeting. And as I was walking out, he says to me, oh, by the way, and I turned and I looked at him and he said, your French friend, very bad tradecraft. And I wasn't really sure what to make of that, other than the fact that he was admitting to me that he had killed the French intelligence officer. I don't know why he didn't try to kill me, but yeah, that kind of thing happens all the time. It's a calculated risk that you take, and if the potential gain is greater than the potential risk, sure, you go forward and you're very happy to meet with criminals.